The moment my spoon hit the tile floor, it wasn't the clang that made my heart skip. It was the voice on the video playing beside me in the kitchen, crisp, confident, and all too familiar. "I'm so excited to share this family treasure with you today," she said. "These are my triple butter buttermilk biscuits. They took me years to perfect." I stood there, frozen, my apron still dusted with flour, watching, as Lena, my daughter-in-law, held up a batch of biscuits on camera, perfectly golden, flaky, thick in the center, browned at the edges. They were my grandmother's biscuits, every detail down to the fold of the dough and the brushing of the tops with warm buttermilk was exactly how I had taught her. But the name she used, hers, not mine, not my grandmother's, not even a quiet nod to the Simmons family. My hands trembled as I reached for the iPad and tapped on her Instagram bio. Lena's Roots, taste tradition with a modern twist, it read. She had 500,000 followers. There, post after post, were dishes I had spent a lifetime curating. The strawberry jam I only made in June, the candied pecans I used to place in mason jars for Christmas gifts, the honey lavender tea cakes I reserved for special occasions, all of them now being repackaged and sold as part of her new brand. I clicked into one video where she smiled into the lens and said, "Today's recipe is inspired by childhood memories, by discovery, and by love." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Her childhood didn't include sweet tomato relish. Her childhood included frozen lasagna and fast food. It was me, my kitchen, my stories, my patience that had introduced her to these things. The video ended with her placing a delicate biscuit on a vintage floral saucer. My saucer. Part of the wedding china set I had once lent her during the holidays. She had borrowed my memories, my recipes, and now apparently even my dishes. I flipped open her Linktree. At the top, in bold, "Pre-order my first cookbook today, Lena's Roots. 120 recipes from the soul." I stared at the screen. This couldn't be real. I opened the preview. There it was. Page 7. My signature sweet tomato relish. A family classic I discovered through instinct and experimentation. My fingers curled tight around the edge of the tablet. She didn't discover it. She had spilled the vinegar the first time she tried to make it, cried when the mixture wouldn't thicken, and begged me for help. I had stood beside her, guiding her through every step, teaching her the timing, the ingredients, the rhythm of it. And now she was calling it hers. She wasn't just stealing recipes, she was rewriting history. That night I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan hummed above me, slicing the silence into quarters. I turned to my left. The empty space where Harold used to sleep before he passed felt even colder. I rose quietly and padded into the kitchen, the floor cool against my bare feet. There, on the top shelf of the bookcase beside the fridge, sat my recipe journal. Worn leather, yellowed pages, notes in two handwritings, my mother's and mine. I opened to the biscuits. There it was. In my handwriting at the bottom, taught Lena on December 14th. She finally got it after burning the first batch. I stared at that note for a long time. I had written it with pride years ago. Now it felt like a confession. Or maybe a record for the court. I flipped through other pages. Honey cakes, lemon preserves, even the pickled watermelon rinds that only 3 people in the world knew how to make correctly, my grandmother, myself, and Lena. Page after page of things now turned into content. She hadn't just taken food. She had taken our lineage. She had taken my voice. The next morning my phone buzzed. My son's name lit up on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Mum," Daniel said. "Hope you're free next weekend. Lena's doing a brunch at the studio. Cookbook pre-launch. We're just inviting family and a few of her sponsors." I said nothing. "She's really excited. You're kind of the inspiration, you know." I swallowed. I didn't know inspiration could be stolen. There was a pause. "Mom." "No thank you," I said. "I won't be attending." Another silence. Then he mumbled something and hung up. I sat down at the table. I felt betrayed. Not just by her, but by him. He knew those recipes. He grew up on them. He should have recognized them. But apparently he didn't care enough to stop her. Or worse, he thought it didn't matter. 2 days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a hardcover copy of Lena's book, tied with a twine ribbon, and a little card that said, Marion, thank you for always believing in food from the heart. I stared at the handwriting. Red ink. She knew I always edited my recipes in red. It wasn't a thank you. It was a message. A message that she believed I would stay silent, that I would be touched, that I would be flattered. But I wasn't. I was furious. The final page of the book had a quote in gold font. To the women who fed us before we knew what we needed. There was no name. She didn't have to write one. She thought that was enough, but she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Please stay with me until the end of this story. And in the meantime, comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. It started as most beautiful things do, with hope. When Daniel first introduced us, Lena wore a burgundy cardigan and held a bouquet of daisies she'd bought herself on the way over. I remember thinking how thoughtful that was, even if she said it was because flowers make me feel more human after a long week. She was polite, soft-spoken, a little nervous around me, but I could see she adored my son. He looked at her the way Harold used to look at me before we had a mortgage and morning routines. That night, she offered to help me dry dishes after dinner, even though I told her to relax. She asked me questions about how I made my blackberry cobbler crust so flaky, how long I'd been teaching at the community centre, how I kept my hydrangeas from dying in the heat. Most girls Daniel dated barely made eye contact with me. Lena listened. When they got engaged, I was genuinely thrilled. I baked a 6-layer vanilla bean cake with real buttercream for their engagement dinner-shaped sugar roses myself. I gave her the family photo albums to browse, told her stories about Daniel as a baby, let her borrow my pearl earrings for her bridal portrait session. I wanted her to feel included, no more than included. I wanted her to feel like mine. The first time she showed interest in cooking, we had just come back from a rainy Saturday farmer's market. I'd found a perfect crate of early peaches and mentioned I'd be making preserves that afternoon. She lit up. I've always wanted to learn how to, she said, but it seemed so intimidating. So I pulled out my old copper pot and set 2 aprons on the counter. She was clumsy. At first, scattered, unsure. She forgot to sterilize the jars, cut one of the peaches too deep, dropped a spoon in the boiling mixture, and splashed herself. But she laughed it off, blushed, and asked questions. I guided her step by step. When the preserves cooled and sealed, I tied gingham cloth around the lids with twine, something my grandmother had taught me. She watched me carefully mimicked the way I trimmed the edges and said, "You have no idea how magical this feels." That night, I wrote her name in my recipe journal. Lena helped today, her first time making preserves. She seemed genuinely proud. That was the beginning of our kitchen bond. It wasn't just food. She came to me when Daniel's job relocated him briefly. I taught her how to tend the garden while he was away. We planted rosemary and thyme, and one stubborn row of lavender that took 3 tries to grow. On her birthday, I gave her a blank journal. "For your own recipes," I said. "I don't have any?" She laughed. "But maybe I'll borrow a few from you." At the time, it sounded sweet. She cried the first time she made my mother's lemon cake. She had burnt the sugar syrup and forgot to sift the flour. I told her to try again. "Do you really think I can do this?" she asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her flour-dusted hand. "Of course," I said. No one gets it perfect the first time. I remember handing her a slice of my own attempt from the counter and saying I was terrible at this once too. That became a tradition between us. Every time she failed a dish, I'd show her my own failures, first burnt crusts, soupy jams, muffins that never rose. She told me I made her feel less alone, and I believed her. When they bought their first house, she asked if I could come over and help stock the kitchen. I brought spice jars, hand-labeled. I brought my extra pastry board. I even gave her a duplicate set of my measuring spoons, the ones engraved with a pinch of love and a heap of courage. We laughed as we lined the pantry. I told her the trick to keeping brown sugar soft was to tuck in a piece of bread. She wrote that down in her phone. There was so much trust then, so much care. She began calling me for advice. how to make the crust for apple pie stretch into a lattice, what to do when the jam wouldn't set, which vinegar worked better with strawberries. At Christmas, she gave me a printed calendar with photos of our kitchen sessions. On the back page was a note. Thank you for letting me borrow your hands when mine didn't know what to do. I cried reading that. When Daniel had a health scare, she was the one who called me in the middle of the night. She told me she didn't want to face the waiting room alone. We sat side by side for 6 hours. She rested her head on my shoulder. I held her hand. Afterward, I brought her soup. She brought me a thank you card. We're lucky to have you, it said. You're the root in our family tree. How could I not love her? How could I ever imagine she'd be capable of what she eventually did? Looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about food. It was about legacy, about the stories I had shared so freely, thinking they would be respected, protected. But maybe I gave too much. Maybe I didn't see that behind the gentle smiles and questions was someone always calculating, always collecting. And maybe I never imagined that kindness could be used like currency gathered, exchanged, and later sold. But I did love her, not like a daughter-in-law, like a daughter. And that's what made the betrayal so sharp, so unforgettable, so unforgivable. It wasn't sudden. That's what made it so hard to notice at first. Like a slow leak behind the walls, quiet, persistent, invisible, until the damage was irreversible. At first it was the little things. Lena stopped calling me by name. She had always said Marion with a kind lilt, or even Mom on rare, sweet occasions. But after the wedding, her tone shifted. It became, can you pass that? Do you mind if I use this, Daniel's mom? Do you want some? It felt clinical, detached. A measured politeness that held me at arm's length. I brushed it off. Newlyweds were finding their rhythm. Maybe she was just trying to set boundaries. I had always believed in giving space. But then she began making subtle adjustments to routines, to traditions, to Daniel. Our Sunday dinners slowly disappeared. For years, Daniel came home every week, sometimes with groceries in hand, sometimes with nothing but his appetite and stories from work. Then, after Lena moved in, he started arriving later. Then not at all. We're just so busy, he told me on the phone. She has content to edit. Content. That word started to haunt me. Every holiday I once hosted turned into a scheduling dilemma. Thanksgiving had to be at their house. Lena wanted to try a modern menu for her online community. Christmas brunch became a live stream event featuring her creative spins on Southern classics. She invited followers, not family. She used phrases like curated guest list and brand alignment. It was no longer about the table. It was about the camera above it. She still asked me for advice, only now it came with qualifiers. I'm thinking of tweaking your tomato relish recipe, she said one afternoon while sipping tea in her studio kitchen. What if I add agave and smoked paprika? I hesitated. That would change it entirely. Exactly, she smiled. Make it mine. The way she said mine didn't sit right with me, but I smiled back, told her to experiment, tried not to feel the sting. Daniel changed too. He stopped calling to check on me during storms. He forgot my annual garden club luncheon, even though I invited him every year. When I mentioned it, he laughed and said Lena's calendar is a mess. I can barely keep up. Lena's calendar. I realized he was no longer speaking in I. Everything was we, or worse, she. He was slowly becoming an assistant to her brand. Once, when I sent him an old photo of our family trip to Savannah, him holding a lemon ice and smiling under the live oaks, he replied 2 days later with a heart emoji. No comment, no memory shared, just a tap and silence. Then came the biscuits. It was a quiet, wet morning in February. I stopped by their house unannounced, with a tin of my fresh-baked buttermilk biscuits, still warm. I had made them the same way I always had, using the metal cutter my grandmother gave me, brushing the tops with melted butter and a dash of sea salt. Lena opened the door, surprised. "Oh, Marion," she said, stepping aside. "We're filming right now, but—" I stepped in and saw the cameras, the lights, the prep table. 3 biscuit trays were already out, perfectly shaped, identical to mine. Her assistant, some young woman with a headset, whispered, 5 minutes till we reset. Lena didn't invite me to sit. She barely glanced at my tin. Oh, she said, you made biscuits. I thought I'd bring a batch in case you wanted to feature them. She forced a smile. That's sweet. But I've got my own version now. I stood there, the heat of the tin seeping through the cloth, not knowing what to say. Daniel walked in, saw me and blinked. Mom, you didn't text first. No, I said softly. I thought I'd just drop by. Lena walked over, took the tin from my hands with exaggerated care, and handed it to her assistant. Put this in the back, please. The assistant nodded and vanished. I never saw the biscuits again. After that day, I stopped offering help. She didn't need it. She had replaced my recipes with printed laminated copies under her own logo. She had created a fake family history for her content, talking about imaginary relatives, made-up childhood stories, all to give her dishes an emotional hook. She never called them lies. She called them brand storytelling. I called it erasure. One night, while watching one of her videos, I noticed a small detail that nearly broke me. On the counter behind her sat my mother's old egg timer. It was vintage, shaped like a chicken. The paint faded from decades of use. I hadn't seen it in years. I had assumed I'd lost it in the move. She had taken it, used it as a prop. She had plucked pieces of me and placed them in her world without context, without credit. And when I asked Daniel about it, he brushed me off. It's just an egg timer, Mom. No, I said. It's your grandmother's. He stared at me. I think you're overreacting. That was the moment something cracked inside me. It wasn't just about the food. It was about being erased, about being rewritten. That summer, she stopped inviting me altogether. No more texts, no more recipe questions, no more brunches or collaborations. When I asked Daniel why, he said, she's really trying to protect her brand now. The audience expects a certain image. And what image is that, I asked. He hesitated. One that's cleaner, more curated, simpler, meaning without me. He didn't reply. I sat on my back porch that night, watching the wind stir through the rosemary bush I had planted when they moved in. My tea had gone cold. I thought of the first time Lena had called me crying over a failed caramel batch. Of the time I stayed up late with her fixing her icing because she wanted Daniel's birthday cake to be perfect. I had given her my tools, my techniques, my stories, and my trust. And now I was the inconvenient variable, a disruption to her narrative. People always ask when something started to fall apart. I used to think it was the day I saw my biscuit recipe on her website. But the truth is, it was far earlier. It was the day I stopped being Marion and started being the woman who got in the way. The first time I wasn't invited, it was framed as an oversight. We figured you wouldn't want to travel that far, Lena said over the phone, her voice breezy, unconcerned. The retreat is upstate, mostly influencers and media people. Just a soft launch thing. She said it as if it were normal to exclude your mother-in-law from the first public unveiling of a brand built on her recipes. I sat in the silence of my living room, the faint scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air from the tea I had brewed that morning, and nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. I understand, I said, but I didn't. I didn't understand why a woman I had once fed, nurtured, supported, and trusted now saw me as inconvenient, embarrassing, out of step with her brand aesthetic. It would have been easier if she had simply said it out loud. You're not part of the story anymore. But instead, she wrote me out one chapter at a time. The next chapter came quietly folded inside what should have been a celebration. It was my birthday, 70 years, a milestone. I had always hosted my own birthdays, not out of vanity, but because I loved the tradition of gathering, sharing food, telling stories. This time I didn't plan anything. I waited. 2 weeks before the date, I received a plain white card in the mail. No return address. Inside a typed note. We're sorry we can't attend this year, but we're sending love and gratitude. We'll make it up to you soon. No signature, no handwriting, just that sterile, lifeless font. 2 days later, I saw why. Lena's brand had launched a limited edition Southern Sunday box, a curated gift basket of preserves, biscuits, jam, and tea cakes. The same ones I had made for decades. The launch date, my birthday. She had spent the week filming promotional content, writing captions about Southern legacy, telling the world about her roots, while I sat in my kitchen waiting for a call that never came. A week later, I visited their house unannounced. I brought with me a tin of lemon scones, the kind Daniel loved as a boy. When Lena opened the door, she looked surprised, almost annoyed. "Oh," she said, stepping aside. "We're kind of in the middle of something." I heard music in the background. Laughter. Glasses clinking. "I won't stay," I said. "Just dropping these off." She glanced at the tin. "Thanks. I'll put them out later if there's room." I peered into the living room. A small group sat around a low table, linen napkins, wooden trays, name cards. A tasting party. For her new flavors, no doubt. Strangers sampling my heritage. But that wasn't the worst part. As I turned to leave, I passed the hallway. On the wall was a large framed canvas, a black and white photo of Lena in an apron flower on her cheeks, holding a tray of biscuits. At the bottom, in scripted gold letters, "Tradition starts here." No mention of whose tradition it was. Then came the podcast. Lena had launched a branded podcast called Her Table. Every episode featured her culinary journey, filled with monologues about rediscovering herself through food. I listened one evening while folding laundry. In episode 3, she said, "When I got married, I was terrified of kitchens. My husband's mother was amazing, but I didn't learn much from her. She was protective, kept things to herself. I had to teach myself everything. I dropped the towel I was folding. Protective. I had given her everything. But to her audience, I had become a shadow, an obstacle, a gatekeeper. She had rewritten me as stingy, dismissive, cold, and Daniel had let her. It escalated from there. At a family gathering hosted by Lena's cousin, I arrived with a homemade peach cobbler. "Oh," Lena said, when she saw it smiling in front of the others. "You brought dessert too? I didn't realize it was covered." "Well, I already made my bourbon-glazed version. I hope people don't get confused." She laughed. The room laughed with her. I smiled tightly and set my dish on the far end of the table. No one touched it. When we sat down to eat, she raised a toast. To Southern women, she said, lifting her glass. Those who pass down stories, and those who write new ones. Everyone clapped. I sat there quiet, invisible. That summer, I began noticing my belongings missing. Small things at first. My ceramic pie weights, a butter stamp shaped like a thistle, a linen apron embroidered with my initials. Gone. I assumed I had misplaced them. Age does that to a mind. Until one day, I watched a behind-the-scenes clip Lena had posted. She was in her kitchen, prepping for a cookbook photo shoot. There it was. My thistle butter stamp. The exact one. Still stained slightly on the bottom from the time I'd scorched a pan in 1997. She hadn't just borrowed it. She had taken it. I confronted Daniel. "Did Lena ask you before taking my things?" He looked up from his phone, distracted. "What things?" "My butter stamp, my apron, my biscuit cutter, my—" "Mom, they're kitchen tools. Lena's building something huge right now. Let her focus. I built those tools into something first." He sighed. "It's just stuff. Don't get so emotional." Emotional. That's what they called it now. My life's work, my memories, my identity reduced to stuff. I began to pull away. Not dramatically, just quietly. I stopped commenting on her videos. I stopped liking her posts. I stopped sending over baskets of cookies for her photo shoots. But still she kept taking. She used my handwriting as part of her visual branding, digitally scanned from an old recipe card I had written in 1984, now turned into a signature font. It appeared on her website banners, on her book spine, on the labels of her jam jars. My handwriting, her name. What hurt more than the theft was the quiet dismissal. The way Daniel looked at me differently when Lena was around. How he hesitated before answering my questions, as if weighing whether they were safe to respond to. He had once been my son mine, in the sense of shared language, shared gestures, shared kitchen memories. But now he was a man who asked permission, with his eyes, before speaking. Her permission? One afternoon, I invited them both over for Sunday supper. I prepared everything roast chicken with thyme collard greens, with ham hock butter rolls the works. I even pulled out the china, my husband's favorite set. It had been years since I used it. They arrived late. Lena barely looked up from her phone. She scrolled through something at the table and mumbled, "This is gorgeous, Marion. But maybe next time we do it at ours, I have better lighting for photos. Better lighting. Not better warmth, not better company, just better filters." Later that evening, after they left, I went to wash the dishes and realized one of my crystal glasses was missing. I called Daniel. "Did you take a glass with you?" There was silence. "I think Lena liked it," he said. "She said it would look great in her vintage flat lay series." "You mean she took it?" "She said you wouldn't mind." "I do." Again silence, then a soft chuckle. "I think you're being a little possessive, Mom." Possessive. He said it like I was guarding trash, like my belongings weren't tied to memories. As if they didn't matter. 2 weeks later, I saw that same glass appear on the cover of a sponsored magazine spread, "A Southern Legacy Through the Eyes of Lena Gray." There was no mention of my name, no credit for the biscuit recipe below the photo, just a smiling Lena standing in a sunlit kitchen, styled to look rustic, but curated a place where nothing was truly old, just designed to seem that way. A manufactured memory, and in her hands, held like a sacred object, was my grandmother's pie plate. The one she had once called too ugly to photograph. Now it was her aesthetic. Now it had value, because she had said so. Then came the fundraiser. She announced a charitable campaign called Preserve the Past, meant to support culinary scholarships for young women. I thought it was admirable at first until I saw the promo video. Footage of her walking through antique markets, interview clips about her family's culinary legacy, an emotional story about how she learned everything from scratch, guided by instinct, spirit, and trial. Not a single photo of me, not a single acknowledgement. Just a black and white clip me in the background, stirring a pot blurred and silent. A prop in her origin story. I reached out. I asked to meet privately. She agreed. We sat across from each other at a cafe she had chosen. Her favorite. Modern. Minimal. All white marble and reclaimed wood. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say. I had practiced the calm tone. I had even written down notes. But when I looked at her across the table, dressed in a clean beige linen dress with a delicate necklace shaped like a spoon, I faltered. "I feel erased," I said finally. "Not just from your book, from all of it." She sipped her tea and said nothing. "I gave you those recipes," I continued. "I taught you how to make them. And now they're out there, with your name. I'm sorry you feel that way," she said slowly. "But you gave them freely. You never asked for anything in return. That's because I thought we were family." Her expression didn't change. "I thought you loved me." She sighed, as if tired. "This brand isn't about you. It's about my journey, my story. You were part of it, sure. But that doesn't mean I owe you everything. I don't want everything I said. Just acknowledgement. Just truth." She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms. "Truth is subjective, Marion?" I stood up. There was nothing left to say. From that moment I knew. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was strategy. She had made a calculated decision to remove me. Not just from the kitchen, but from history. After that cafe meeting, I didn't speak to Lena for nearly 3 weeks. It was a silence she didn't seem to notice. She continued posting, filming, releasing recipes with captions like, "Straight from my soul to your Sunday table, born of heritage and heart." None of those recipes were hers, but they were now. Her audience grew. She booked a cooking segment on local television. I watched from my kitchen in stunned silence as she made my grandmother's molasses cornbread and claimed it came to her through years of testing old notebooks and whispering memories. She never once tested it. I had shown her every step. She had cried over it the first time because she had burned the top. I had consoled her. I had stayed up to finish it myself because she had given up. And now she presented it as her legacy. She smiled wide for the camera. The anchors praised her innovative reinvention of Southern cuisine. She nodded gracefully. The truth never even entered the room. It was Daniel who delivered the final blow. He called one afternoon, his voice unsteady but determined. "Mom," he began, "Lena and we've decided it's best if you don't come to the cookbook launch gala." The words hung between us. "I see," I said quietly. "It's just that things have gotten tense, and she wants to keep the night focused on the brand. And the truth would distract from that." He paused. "You could always come quietly, as a guest. Just no interviews, no comments, no presence," I corrected him. "You mean I can attend my own funeral but not speak?" "Mom, I made those recipes, Daniel. She worked hard, too. She brought them to life." "No," I said, my voice sharper now. "I brought them to life when she didn't even know how to hold a whisk." He didn't respond. "Do you even remember who taught you to fold dough?" "I remember," he whispered. "Then act like it." I hung up before he could say more. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from Lena's legal representative. Polite, sterile, cold. A cease and desist warning. It stated that any interference with public representation of the Lena's Roots brand, including but not limited to claims of authorship ownership or creative origin of published material, may be subject to civil challenge. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not from humor, from disbelief. The girl who had once stood in my kitchen and begged me to help her hold a piping bag was now threatening me with lawyers for saying I taught her how to bake. That letter wasn't just a threat. It was erasure weaponized. That night, I opened my recipe journal. I turned through each page slowly. Beneath every recipe, every note, every drawing, I had signed my name. In pen. With care. I thought I had been preserving love, but now I saw it differently. I had been preserving evidence. At the back of the book, on a page I hadn't touched in years, I found a sticky note in Lena's handwriting. She had written it the night she first made the fig preserves, right after 3 failed batches. It said, "You make me believe I can do anything." That note shook in my hands, not because of what it said, but because I had believed her too. I had believed that love was enough to prevent betrayal. That family would mean protection. That legacy couldn't be taken. I had been wrong. But that night I also made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. And I certainly wasn't going to stay silent. If Lena wanted a brand built on lies, she could have it. But I was going to bring the truth to the table, in the only language she now seemed to respect. Legal. I didn't go looking for it. That's the part I replay most in my mind. I wasn't trying to dig up dirt. I wasn't plotting revenge. I simply wanted to cancel a garden mulch delivery I had scheduled before the heat wave rolled in. But when I opened my old desktop computer to find the confirmation email, something unexpected caught my eye. It was a forwarded email from Lena's publishing agent. The subject line read, "Final confirmation. Manuscript, submission and authorship contract. Lena Gray." I blinked. The email had been copied to Daniel's old address, the one I set up for him when he was 16, the one still connected to our shared cloud folder from years ago. I clicked it, and there it was, the full contract, with a clause that stated in perfectly worded legal language that all recipes contained in the book were original creations authored solely by Lena Gray, that no outside party or pre-existing material contributed to the body of work. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It wasn't just omission. It was perjury. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again. I tossed my mind, spinning with phrases from that contract. Sole originator of intellectual property. No competing claims may be recognized or acknowledged. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, and pulled out a cardboard box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photo albums. But not just any albums. These were the ones I had assembled over decades, images of every Thanksgiving, every Sunday meal, every jam-making session. And then I found them. Photos of Lena and me in the kitchen. Her with jam-stained fingers. Her holding my note cards. Me showing her how to shape the biscuit dough by hand. I flipped the photos over. Dates? Locations? My handwriting? Then I pulled out the journals. Not just my own, but the copy I had made for Lena after her first year of learning. I had forgotten I'd made it for her. She had cried when I gave it to her. I had scanned my grandmother's original recipe pages, printed them in color, and inserted typed instructions beneath. On the last page, I had written, "For Lena, so that one day when your kitchen is filled with the smells of love and flour and legacy, you'll remember where it all began." She had never mentioned it again. I wondered if she still had it. I wondered if it was buried under some studio set or, worse, thrown away the moment her first video hit 50,000 views. 2 days later, I ran into Denise at the farmer's market. She had once worked as Lena's early branding consultant, back when Lena's Root Revival page had less than 10,000 followers. She smiled politely. "You must be proud of how big her brand's become." I nodded. "She always said she had a culinary mentor," Denise continued. "A tough one. Kept her sharp." I assumed it was a chef in New York. "A chef?" I asked. She said she trained under someone up north. Said her mentor taught her flavor precision and how to build a plate from scratch. I stopped walking. "She never mentioned you," Denise added, then paused. "That's odd now that I think about it. I mean, I assumed you were the one." I smiled politely. I assumed that too. Later that afternoon, I visited the town library not for books, but for local archives. I remembered Lena had done an interview for the county food column 2 years ago. I pulled up the file. The article headline read, "Rooted in Passion, How Lena Gray Turned Ancestral Curiosity into Culinary Gold." She described growing up without female cooks in her family. Said her mum hated cooking. Said she'd spent her college years traveling to old southern towns and collecting whispers of tradition. She even claimed that she accidentally discovered a handwritten family recipe in a thrift store in Tennessee that led her to invent her signature fig jam. That was my recipe. I created it for Harold's retirement party. I had photos. I had a video. There was no thrift store in Tennessee. There was my kitchen in Georgia, with my husband in a rocking chair holding a spoon and groaning, "Too sweet," as I adjusted the ratios. I remember that day more vividly than my wedding. I reached out to Sharon, an old friend of Daniel's from high school, now a paralegal. "I'm not asking you to intervene," I said. "I just need to know something." She reviewed the publishing contract I had found. "This clause here," she pointed out, "is dangerous. She's legally declaring that nothing in this book comes from any prior author. If you can prove otherwise, it's not just unethical. It's a copyright violation." "But what if I never copyrighted my recipes?" I asked. She shook her head. "Did you write them down?" "Yes." "Dated. Catalogued. Some were even used in published newsletters at the community center." She smiled. "Then you have proof of authorship." I stared at her. For years, I thought my life was private, humble, quiet. Now I realized it was documented, preserved. And if Lena wanted to take me to war over what I had built, I finally had ammunition. I returned home and opened every drawer. I made piles, not just recipes, but video footage, audio, emails, text messages. I had notes from Lena asking for help, screenshots of our chats about temperature adjustments, recordings of her thanking me for saving her jam batch before her brand's soft launch, photos of us testing cookie cutters, blog posts she had written in her early days that referenced me directly. "My mother-in-law makes the best jam I've ever tasted." All deleted now from the internet, but not from my records. Then came the final spark. One evening, while watering my garden, I overheard my neighbor's daughter, 18 and impressionable, talking to a friend on speakerphone. "Lena's so inspiring," she said. "I want to be like her, build something from nothing, no help, just talent." My stomach twisted. That was the moment it truly landed. This wasn't just a matter of my pride. It wasn't about getting credit. It was about truth. Lena was shaping young women into believing that you succeed by rewriting the past, by denying those who helped you. That wasn't ambition. That was fraud. I set down the watering can. I went inside. I printed every page. And I called a lawyer. People assume I'm the villain, that I took something that wasn't mine, that I'm ambitious to the point of cruelty. But no one ever asks why. No one ever bothers to peel back the layers of expectation, the weight of silence, the pressure of being the outsider in a family that treated tradition like scripture. So if you're here for the truth, here it is. You might not like it, but at least you'll hear it from me. When I married Daniel, I walked into a world I didn't understand. His family was polite, charming, steeped in routines and rituals I had never seen in my life. They knew how to set a formal table, how to balance salt and fat, how to serve bread, warm without losing the crust. I was raised in a house where dinner came in cartons, where holidays were frozen pies and deli platters. My mother hated cooking. She hated the smell, the cleanup, the obligation. Food in our house was utility. But in Daniel's house, food was performance, power, proof that you belonged. And Marion? She wielded it with quiet precision. She never told me I didn't fit in. She didn't have to. I saw it in the way she moved around her kitchen like a stage, graceful, effortless, knowing exactly which drawer held what. She could dice an onion without looking down. She could braid a pie crust like it was muscle memory. She wore her apron like a crown. The first time I tried to help, I peeled the wrong apples. She didn't say anything, just gently corrected me and started over. But the silence was louder than any scolding. I felt like a child, like a fraud. I didn't grow up with traditions, so I latched onto hers. Desperately. Every Sunday dinner, I paid close attention. I brought a notebook, pretended it was casual. I memorized techniques. I watched the way she added vinegar to cut sweetness, the way she stirred only in one direction for certain jams. I absorbed it all because I didn't know how else to earn space in that house. Daniel loved me, but he belonged to her. He still made her coffee the way she liked 2 sugars, 1 cream without asking. He still called her for advice about his taxes. He still watched her face at dinner before telling a joke just to make sure it landed. I envied that. No, I resented it. For a while, I genuinely loved Marion. She was patient, smart, intimidating, yes, but impressive. She once taught me how to roll biscuit dough without overhandling it, and I remember thinking, this is sacred. This is what it means to be wanted. But the more I learned, the more I realized something no one wanted to say out loud. Everything in that house had already been claimed. Every story, every tradition, every recipe. None of it would ever be mine. Even the dishes I cooked were prefaced by her name: Marion's cornbread, Marion's lemon bars, Marion's preserves. I was just the courier, the one repeating the lines, so I stopped asking. I started experimenting. I added my own ingredients. I renamed things. I reimagined the stories not to erase her, but to finally see me in the narrative. When I called it Fig Jam from Tennessee, it wasn't because I hated her version. It was because I was trying to build something from scratch. Marion had a lifetime of legacy. I had a blank page, and blank pages are terrifying. When I started the brand, it wasn't about stealing. It was about surviving. I was a woman with no formal culinary degree, no generational support, no famous relatives. I was just a girl with a camera and a hunger for more. So I told stories. I crafted a voice. I created a character that was part me, part aspiration. And yes, that character borrowed from Marion. She had to, because Marion was the only version of warmth and heritage I had ever seen up close. People ask why I never mentioned her by name, because she wouldn't have wanted it. Marion hated social media. She once told me it was performative nonsense. She didn't want her kitchen photographed. She didn't want her recipes branded. She didn't want her name sold. So I kept her out of it. I thought I was respecting her. I thought I was protecting her. I never expected her to want credit for something she had once given away so freely. But maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she never meant to give it away. Maybe she thought it was a loan. Do I regret not including her? Yes, but I also know this. If I had asked for permission to use the biscuits, she would have said no. If I had asked to film in her kitchen, she would have said no. If I had asked to publish the Fig Jam, she would have said no, and my dream would have died before it ever began. So I did what women like me have done for generations. I took what I had. I made it my own, and I hoped that one day when I looked back, the world I built would be worth the price. But here we are. She sees theft. I see transformation. She sees betrayal. I see reinvention. She sees me as a liar. I see myself as someone who refused to be invisible. Maybe the truth lives somewhere in the middle. Maybe we're both right. Or maybe we're both too proud to admit we're wrong. Either way, the brand is mine now. And no matter how much flour or history she throws at me, that won't change. Because I didn't just inherit recipes, I created a voice. And for the first time in my life, people are listening. The woman at the front desk looked confused when I said the name. "Are you sure she worked here?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. Her name was Allison. She was Lena's first assistant, blonde, soft-spoken. She helped during the early content shoots. The receptionist tapped her keyboard, then tilted her head. "She left about a year ago. We don't have forwarding information, but I think she freelances now." I slid a card across the counter. "If she comes in, please give her this." I didn't expect a call, but 3 days later my phone rang. Her voice was cautious but not unfriendly. "I'm sorry, Marian Wright. I wasn't sure if I should call." "Thank you for doing it," I said. She hesitated. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm not asking you to. I just need to know the truth. We met at a bakery, neutral ground. She wore a simple blue cardigan and sat across from me with her hands folded. She's brilliant," Allison said quietly. "Driven, charming when she wants to be, but she's strategic." I said nothing. She never lied to me directly, but she avoided giving me real answers about the recipes. I once asked her where she learned to ferment watermelon rinds. She said it was an old aunt. "But I found your name written in the margin of the original draft." She sipped her tea. After a while, I stopped asking. She didn't like questions. I pulled out a printed photo one from the early content days. It showed Allison and Lena standing in front of a table filled with baked goods. In the background, clearly visible, was my embroidered apron. "That's mine," I said. "I remember," she replied. She brought it in and told us it belonged to someone who inspired her. We assumed it was her grandmother. She told me it was too outdated for camera. Allison looked down. She's not malicious, but she's ambitious in a way that doesn't leave room for anyone else. I began documenting everything. I created folders, digital and physical. Photos, screenshots, audio clips, statements from people who had been in my kitchen, guest lists, emails, a breadcrumb trail of truth. I visited the community center where I'd taught baking classes for over 20 years. I requested old newsletters, found 4 issues where my fig jam recipe was printed under my name. I reached out to Clara, an old student who now worked in local journalism. "Would you be willing to sign an affidavit that you learned these recipes from me in 2009? "Of course," she said. "You even told us the story behind them about your grandmother's kitchen in Alabama." Then came the hardest part. I scheduled an appointment with a copyright attorney. Her name was Denise Hong, sharp, meticulous, based in Atlanta. I've never copyrighted anything I admitted during our first meeting, but everything I taught, everything I wrote, I documented it. She nodded. "That helps. A lot. But we need more than just proof. We need motive and a pattern." I handed her the binder I'd prepared. She flipped through it for 10 minutes in silence. Then she closed it and said, "This isn't just a pattern. This is a blueprint." We filed the first notice within 2 weeks. A formal cease and desist for unauthorized use of derivative works originating from my documented recipes, content notes, and culinary material. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet, but it was a warning. Lena received it on a Thursday. She didn't respond. Not to me, not to Daniel, but her legal team did. They called it a misunderstanding. They offered a quiet settlement, a brief acknowledgement in the next print run of her book. No public statement, no media. I declined. I didn't want a line in the back of a cookbook. I wanted the truth restored. Around that time, an unexpected ally stepped forward. Gregory, my late husband's former colleague, now semi-retired teaching food ethics at a university. He'd once interviewed Lena for a guest lecture. I thought it was strange, he said, the way she talked about food, as if it floated down from nowhere. She had no culinary lineage, claimed she tapped into something universal. He offered to write a statement, not just about the ethics of attribution, but about cultural culinary inheritance, and how erasing elders from family tradition was a quiet form of violence. His words, not mine, but I agreed with every one of them. Then came the audio file. Allison had kept it accidentally. A phone voice memo from one of the shoot days. She played it for me in a quiet booth at the library. In the recording, Lena can be heard talking to someone off camera. If she ever starts asking questions, I'll just say I made adjustments, that it evolved. That's not theft. It's branding. There was a pause, then her voice again firmer this time. She won't fight me. She never does. She was wrong. I had enough now. Not just for a claim, for a case. But I didn't want to destroy her. Not completely. I wanted her to understand the cost of erasure. I wanted her to face the legacy she had tried to rewrite. And most of all, I wanted Daniel to hear the full truth, because he had stood in silence too long. And silence, I had learned, is the most dangerous accomplice of all. It was held in the ballroom of a historic hotel. Marble floors, gold-trimmed chandeliers, walls covered in magnolia-patterned wallpaper meant to whisper southern charm. Lena stood at the front of the room, radiant beneath stage lights, holding a hardcover copy of her second cookbook. This one was titled Rooted Further Evolving Southern Flavor. She wore a pale cream dress hair pinned back in waves earrings that sparkled like she belonged in front of cameras. The crowd applauded as she opened with her speech. I always believed food was more than flavor, she said. It's memory. And memory lives not in books or photographs, but in the taste of something familiar. She gestured toward the 3 tables of food lined along the room's edge. This collection is the most personal work I've done. These recipes are mine, yes, but they come from a place I discovered slowly, painfully, and with reverence. There it was again, discovered. The crowd applauded, and in that moment I stood. No one noticed at first. The room was too full, too bright. But Daniel did. He was seated near the front. His face froze when he saw me. I hadn't told him I was coming. I made my way slowly up the side of the room, past servers holding trays of bourbon-glazed pecans and cranberry tarts. I stopped by the biscuit table. The display card read, Triple Butter Buttermilk Biscuits. Lena's signature. They looked exactly like mine. Because they were, I stepped up to the microphone at the side of the stage. There was a pause in the music. A few people looked toward me, unsure. Lena froze. Excuse me, I said. May I say something? The coordinator rushed toward me. Ma'am, this is a private speaking slot. But Lena spoke first. It's all right, she said tightly. She's family. There was an edge in her voice that only I could hear. I stepped onto the platform and turned toward the audience. My name is Marion Simmons, I began. Many of you know Lena as the author of these beautiful cookbooks. You know her story, or at least the version you've been sold. A ripple moved through the room. I held up a copy of her first book. This recipe here, I said, flipping to page 42, was taught to Lena by me in my kitchen. December 14th. I have a photo of us. I have a note in my recipe journal. I have a video. I even have her handwriting on a draft version. I turned a page. This Fig Jam Mine. First published in the Stone County Community Center newsletter in 2002. Someone in the audience gasped. Lena took a step forward. Marion, this isn't the place. I turned to face her. No. Because it seems to be the place where you've made a career rewriting history. Where you've stood in front of cameras and erased the very hands that taught you what you now claim as your own. She was silent. The room was not. People whispered, murmured. A blogger in the front row began typing on her phone furiously. I continued. I gave you those recipes out of love. I opened my kitchen, my home. I shared what was sacred. And in return, you trademarked them, sold them, copyrighted them under your name. And when I asked for recognition, you sent me a letter threatening legal action. Now the room fell silent. Lena looked pale. Daniel stood his mouth slightly open, unsure who to approach. This, I said, raising the book again, is not innovation. It's theft, dressed in gingham and charm. The microphone popped as I stepped back. Then I said the last thing I needed to say. I don't want money. I don't want fame. I want the truth back in the story. And I walked off the stage. The backlash was immediate. Within hours, photos from the event were online. Within 24 hours, food blogs began dissecting the confrontation. By the next day, Lena's Instagram was flooded with comments. Is this true? Did you really steal her recipes? Say her name. She posted a vague story. Sometimes family pain spills into the public eye. I've always tried to uplift where I could. No one was satisfied. A clip of my speech went viral. People called it the Southern Recipe Reckoning. I received messages from strangers, other women, older women, mothers and grandmothers saying thank you, not because they knew me, but because someone had finally said it out loud. That erasure is betrayal. That legacy matters. That credit is a form of love. Daniel came to see me 3 days later. He stood at my door with no flowers, no excuses. I didn't know, he said softly. Yes, you did, I replied. You just didn't want to choose. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had once taught Lena how to braid pastry dough. We said nothing for a long time. Then I reached under the table and pulled out a tin. Inside were biscuits. The real ones, still warm. He took one, broke it open, and smiled. 2 weeks after the launch event, I received an email. It was from the United States Copyright Office. The subject line read, Registration, Confirmation, Marion Simmons, Culinary Collection, Volume Wash, 1975-2020. Attached was a certificate, a simple document, 1 page. But it meant everything. It meant recognition. It meant protection. It meant that the stories I had written in flour and fire and handwritten ink were now legally indisputably mine. And that meant something else, too. It meant Lena's empire had a crack in its foundation. Denise, my attorney, had moved quickly after the public confrontation. She compiled everything, the journals, the newsletters, the emails, the early website screenshots, the digital footprints of my recipes that had existed long before Lena's first post. More importantly, we had proof of intent, Lena's contracts, private audio, and internal communication from her team. Her choice to remove attribution wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. We filed a formal complaint with the U.S. District Court under Section 106 of the Copyright Act, unauthorized use and publication of protected culinary works. We included a public request for injunctive relief to halt any future printings, digital sales, or promotional use of materials that originated from my documentation. But Denise added something else, a demand for retroactive credit. Across both published cookbooks, across the website, across the packaging of every product derived from the stolen material. The legal team representing Lena's brand replied in under 48 hours. They requested a private settlement. Denise refused. They requested a non-disclosure agreement. Denise refused again. She leaned across her desk and told me, "This isn't about money. This is about record, about narrative, about restoration." I nodded. She was right. Daniel visited again the day Lena was served. He looked pale. "She's furious," he said you're trying to ruin her. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm trying to restore myself. She says the lawyers will crush you." She might have thought that before. He looked down at the letter on my table, the one bearing the seal of the court. Then he looked up. "I want to testify," he said. I blinked. I was there for most of it. I remember who made what. I remember what she asked you for, what she borrowed. I didn't speak. I didn't protect you before. But I can tell the truth now. That was all I ever wanted. The court date was scheduled. It never happened, because the morning before Lena's team contacted Denise with a revised offer. Not money, not silence, but an acknowledgement, a public one. Full-page ads in 3 culinary publications, a press release, a reprint announcement, and most importantly, an apology. I read the draft statement myself. It began, "The recipes I have built my brand upon would not exist without the guidance, knowledge, and legacy of Marion Simmons. I failed to credit her contributions, and I recognize that omission as a violation of both personal and professional ethics." It was simple, but it was enough. Denise asked me if I wanted to demand more. "No," I said. "Just make sure it's printed in Lena's handwriting." She looked at me. I smiled. It's poetic. The reprints began the following month. Lena's books now featured a new preface. "To Marion Simmons, whose hands taught mine, whose stories shaped my own, and whose truth I can no longer deny." I didn't cry when I read it. But I did sit in silence for a long time, not out of sadness, out of peace, because this time the story began in the right place. I also updated something else. My will. I created a living culinary trust, the Simmons Table Collection. A legal entity? A foundation. Every recipe I ever wrote, every story behind it, archived, protected, shared only with credit. I named Daniel as the executor. I named a local community college as the beneficiary for scholarship students studying food history and recipe archiving. And at the top of the document, under mission, I wrote, Preserve Truth, Honor Source, Feed Legacy. Lena has since pivoted her brand. Fewer recipes, more lifestyle content. She removed most of the old videos. She no longer refers to herself as a self-taught culinary visionary. She refers to herself as a student of tradition that I can accept. She never contacted me again, and I never reached out. But sometimes, late at night, I open the new version of her book. I flip to the page with the biscuits, and I smile, because now just below the title in bold serif font are the words, originally taught to the author by Marion Simmons, December 14th, 2017. That's all I ever wanted. My name back, on the recipe I gave, in the house I built. I moved the chair back to its old spot by the window, the one Harold used to sit in reading the paper while the smell of rising dough wrapped around our little home like a blanket. For the first time in years, the kitchen felt quiet, not empty, not lonely, just mine. The camera lights were gone. The drama was gone. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was earned. On Saturday mornings, I still wake early. I still make tea. I still write in my recipe journal not out of fear it will be taken, but because I love watching the ink curl on the page. There's something sacred in handwriting. Something no camera can capture. Daniel visits more now. He brings groceries. Sometimes flowers. Once he brought a clipping from Lena's blog, where she mentioned her mentor in a gentle, unspoken nod. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. I no longer need to be seen to know I exist. I just need to live. I've started teaching again, not formally, but informally. Local teens, single mums, a young man who wants to open a food truck someday. I open my kitchen to them. Let them mess up. Let them fail. Let them rewrite the stories the way they need to, but only after they've learned the truth. One afternoon, a girl named Brianna asked me why I wasn't more famous. You're better than the people on YouTube, she said, licking sugar off her thumb. Maybe I told her. But not everything worth keeping needs to be broadcast. She tilted her head. Then why write it down? I thought about that. About Lena. About the cost of not writing things down. Not protecting what matters. Because memory can be misplaced, I said. But paper doesn't forget. Last week, I stood in front of a shelf at the local bookstore. Lena's book, the revised edition, sat next to a title called The Kitchen They Tried to Erase. Mine. Denise helped me publish it. Not for sales, not for revenge, but for preservation. It's not flashy. It doesn't have a trailer or a website or a curated Instagram feed. But it's honest, and that's more than I could say before. Sometimes the girls I mentor ask if I still feel bitter. I tell them no. Anger is sharp, but it dulls when you use it to carve something better. I let it fuel me, not define me. And now I travel. I visit old friends. I bake with people who don't care if the biscuits are marketable. I tend my garden again, lavender, mint, lemon balm, the same things I once taught Lena to grow. Some things still bloom after being cut down. The kitchen doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels holy, not because of what was lost, but because of what I chose to keep. Not because of who left, but because of who stayed. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. You're never too old to start again. You're never too small to reclaim your story. And you're never too late to say, this recipe is mine. If you want more powerful stories about Truth Family and fighting for what's right, don't forget to subscribe for the next one.